how are you spending your winter time there?
My winter time. Well, I'm back teaching classes. We started teaching last week, so I'm back in. Well, they're called in-person high flex classes. In the class, I have some students who will be in the classroom, and about a third of the students will be in the classroom, and about two-thirds.
How did you leave the elections that won Biden?
Well, first of all, there were a lot of the thing that struck me most about the election was how Trump increased the Republican base from 2018 to the 2020 election after the Republicans lost the midterm election. He in his getting the second largest number of votes of any candidate in American history. That meant he really expanded the number of Republican voters by an enormous amount. The Democrats were able to keep up their mobilization of voters, and they won the presidency because enough voters were upset with Donald Trump to either vote against him or at least not vote for him. But the Republican Party itself did very well. I mean, the loss in Georgia, was significant, not in terms of losing control of the Senate, but they increased significantly their number of House seats, and they're in a good position to basically take the House and the Senate in the 2022 election, depending on how well the Biden administration performs. And of course, Trump has left Biden with a real mess to deal with.
In which voter segments you saw some advance of Trump in particular?
Well, he just expanded his normal base of white voters, especially white voters without a college education, and especially white voters living in small towns and in suburbs, in different parts of the country. And he did better in a lot of those areas than he had done before. And then Biden did better in typical Democratic strongholds, urban areas, and he picked up some suburbs. So both parties basically, expanded their base. Trump did do a little bit better, slightly better among African American voters, and he did pick up Hispanic voters, Latino voters, in certain parts of the country, particularly in Florida, Dade County, and so forth. But this was really, for the most part, as what we would call a base election. That is, both parties basically expanded their bases.
Did you expect the incidents in the Capitol?
Well, a lot of us expected some kind of incidents like that, at some point. So I don't think anyone was very surprised that there would be that kind of protest at the Capitol. What was surprising is basically how the security at the Capitol was so deficient that the insurgents were able to get in the building and take over parts of it for a while.
How do you see the future of Trump and the Trumpism in particular? Do you expect that Trump could be maybe a revival, maybe in 2024 elections, or maybe his movement, the Trumpism, maybe could have some role in the future of the Republican Party? How do you see that things, Trump and Trumpism?
Well, in terms of Trump, if Trump gets out of all this and is still permitted to run for president of the United States, then he will be a political power going into the 2024 election. I think that, or at least he's going to very much try to be. Whether he's lost some of his support of the sort that he had in 2016 and in 2020, we'll have to see. If he's not permitted to run for whatever reason, then his base seems to be more loyal to him than to the mainstream Republican Party, and so he's going to be a force to reckon with in some fashion in the party. And we saw, we've already seen that there are Republicans leaders like Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley they would like to capitalize on Trump's base and become the next candidate with that kind of base of support.
If the Democrats call you to request some political advice of you,
yes,
which advice you would give to them in relation to Trump? Is to block the participation, or maybe to allow the participation of Trump in the next elections?
Well, I think his role in inciting the insurgency is really such a terrible act that they really obliged to do something to punish him in some fashion for that, and that punishment, if they can do it either through impeachment or through the invoking of there's a provision in the 14th Amendment that could be used for Biden and the Democrats to prevent Trump from ever running again for public office. They should do that, I think, on general principles. But in terms of the political prospects of the Democratic Party, either against Trump or the Republicans more generally, they have to deal with the current crisis in the United States having to do with the pandemic and the economy. Those are the things, and that's going to really determine the political prospects for the Democratic Party in 2022 and 2024.
Which is, in your opinion, maybe the main challenge of the Biden administration for the first year? In your view, which is the main challenge will have the new administration?
Oh, the challenge is the pandemic. That is, he's basically emphasized that's his top problem that he has to deal with, and starting on the 20th when he takes office, he'll start doing things with his administration the first challenge is to make the vaccine as widely available and as quickly available as possible, and that really is the first challenge, because that's the way to put a halt to the pandemic, and to also do the best he can. I mean, he's talking about requiring masks in all federal buildings to do what he can to encourage people to take the necessary precautions in dealing with the virus. That really is the main problem. And then at the same time, as part of his pandemic relief bill, to basically put more money into people's pockets, provide funds to businesses and local governments to deal with both to deal with the pandemic, help local governments that are involved in that, but also to deal with national and state and local economic deficiencies.
Do you see some parallel with the Roosevelt times in the New Deal? With the New Deal, could we?
Yeah, I think
some.
Yeah, I think there's some parallels there. I mean, the economy is in dire straits. Even though the fundamentals in the economy are sound, that is, if the pandemic were to disappear and people can get back to work, the fundamentals are sound. But in terms of how to deal with the crisis and how to deal with the pandemic, that requires a concerted, targeted set of actions by the national government, which for Roosevelt was of a monument, was of a groundbreaking sort in the United States. For Biden to follow up with those kinds of things, he would just be repeating the kinds of things that Roosevelt had done. That is, this has been done before in the United States, and he could do something of the sort that was done before. For Roosevelt, this was new.
The government, the relationship between the moderate Democrats and the progressives Democrats.
Well, I think there are possibilities of conflict there, especially once the country gets past the pandemic. I think there'll be conflicts there because the more progressive wing of the Democratic Party will want the government to do engage in more aggressive policies in the areas of education, the environment, and other areas, particularly those that deal with issues of economic inequality and also especially racial justice and criminal justice. That is, those kinds of issues are ones that they're going to push to the left on very hard. There could be tensions there, but in the meantime, I think Biden can hold the party together at least initially, in dealing with the pandemic and economic issues. The big problem there is not conflict within the party. The big problem there is conflict with the Republicans, in terms of Biden has to do things that require legislation that cannot be done through reconciliation bills, but are legislation that can be subjected to a filibuster by the Republicans. That's where the conflict will arise. At least.
In relation to foreign policy, are you seeing maybe some kind of change in relation to Trump times, specifically in relation to China? Maybe in relation to the multilateral view of the world, or another topics maybe you are considering.
Well, in general, I think the Biden administration will be interested in furthering multilateral relationships, supporting international organizations. Putting China aside for the second, he'll try to do something on the Iran nuclear agreement and get the U.S. back involved in the global climate change agreement, and also try to improve friendly relations with Europe. With regard to China, I think things are going to still be pretty intense there. I don't think the Biden administration is very much at odds with what the Trump administration was doing with regard to China. I think the one thing that the Biden administration will try to do is work more with its allies in Asia to deal with China, and in a way that the Trump administration had not been doing, where Trump was happier to simply go it alone and deal with China and with through more protectionist policies and doing some saber rattling, so to speak, on the security front in that part of Asia. I think Biden will want to see one is he may try to approach China as a fresh start, but in doing that, I think he may do that more in conjunction with working with allies.
Coming back to the domestic policy, are you seeing maybe that the new government can have some kind of bipartisan collaboration, as it happened in the times of Reagan or Clinton, in relation to some specific policies?
Well, first, you have to recognize that the parties really are divided on a wide range of issues, which makes bipartisanship and collaboration difficult. Biden insists that he can find a way to work with the Republicans, but I think that will only work if both sides are willing to accept compromises and see where they can find certain kinds of common ground. I mean, Biden is and we'll see what's going on right off the bat. He's proposing a $1.9 trillion assistance bill, and there are a lot of things in that bill that the Republicans don't like. If he's willing to compromise and just push through the things that both parties, and here we can simply talk about to what extent Biden and Mitch McConnell agree on things. With regard to assistance, I think the Republicans are less supportive of large-scale assistance to everyone in terms of payments to everyone, increases in unemployment benefits, payments to businesses and so forth in a broad blanket way. They would be more supportive of focusing on aid to people and businesses in genuine need. So they'd be supportive of a more limited program. I think with regard to what Biden thinks the country needs in terms of funds to deal with the pandemic, you would think there would be no disagreement, especially because even conservative economists agree that in order to deal with the economy, we have to deal with the pandemic first. So I think the common ground would be the funds needed to deal with the pandemic and to deal with people who are in dire economic strait, but without providing excess benefits to everyone.
Okay, Bob. Maybe
the one other issue area is how much the Republicans would be willing to increase taxes on the rich and on business. And I think there might be some opportunities for compromise, not returning to the previous levels of high taxes on business and the wealthy, but but increasing taxes by a few.
Do you see that policy could be possible to increase taxes with the Republicans?
Yeah, I think. Well, for example, there's talk of increasing business taxes from 21% to 28%, which is less than it was originally when Trump cut it to 21%. I think there might be possibilities there, maybe not to 28%, but maybe possibly 24% or something like that, and increasing taxes on the wealthy in terms of personal income. With regard to deregulation, I think there Biden can do a lot through executive orders, and he doesn't have to work with Republicans on that. He can do certain things unilaterally. If there are things that require bipartisanship to return to increases in regulation, I think that's going to be more difficult. The Republicans will be much more opposed to that. So legislation may be more difficult.
Maybe, Bob, my last question is related that, do you see that it's possible a pacification of the country, and in particular, maybe with the fact that maybe with the possibility that Trump could be punished maybe in the near future? Do you see that? Do you see viable some kind of pacification in the maybe for the near future, in the beginning of a Biden administration? That
we'll know by the end of this week how much internal domestic conflict that there is, and we'll be able to tell by the extent to which basically to the extent to which they're basically armed protesters at state capitals, and to what extent you see large-scale protests in Washington of people kind of prepared for a fight, so to speak. So we'll see something like that. In terms of pacifying that or neutralizing that, I mean, the best chance Biden has for unifying the country is to show that he can basically move the country out of the pandemic and into basically into health and economic prosperity going forward. I think that's going to be the main thing. If he shows he can do that, that will I think that will basically lessen the conflict at least somewhat, because these really are pretty dire problems. We're talking about life and death issues here, but he's got to show that he can do it. And this idea of getting 100 people vaccinated in 100 days, if he could do something like that, and we see a decline in the infection rate of the virus and the opening up of the economy in certain states, that should do a lot to lessen the tension. Not completely. And Trump, but the other crucial thing is he's got to take the limelight, the press attention away from Trump. That is, it's got to focus on current problems and not on Trump. And that will be the big thing. To what extent that Trump can stay in the public's view. Now, of course, if there are impeachment proceedings, that will keep Trump in the public view, and that's the downside of proceeding with the impeachment.
A successful formula could be vaccination plus the New Deal too, maybe.
Yes, that's it. I agree.
Maybe one more question is related. How did you see the banning of in relation to these technological giants that ban the Trump tweeting and using Facebook? How is your approach to this topic?
Yeah, that really is a complicated topic. I think that was really decisive action what the social media companies did, and it may be a good thing with regard to Trump and the current spread of misinformation. But that kind of regulation really is very bad with respect to democratic norms and values of free speech. And I think the country needs to figure out a better way to deal with that. Although the problem has occurred because a lot of people, and this is Trump especially, have violated all normal democratic norms and values with regard to basically truth telling when it comes to discussing politics. And when people are telling blatant lies, and especially when these lies lead to violence, the kind of speech that can easily can be justifiably be regulated is speech that directly tries to incite violence. But there are other kinds of speech that might foster that they promote conflict and violence, but without directly inciting it. And it's the regulation of that kind of speech that poses problems for the ideal of freedom of speech.
Okay, Bob, you are optimist with the future?
Yes, I'm optimistic, depending on how things go this week.
Okay, Bob. Nice to see you again.
See you again.
I will send you the video.